that you do have this unique flair of storytelling. It's not something that a lot of people would think about when they think of you.
Sure.
Not straight up, yeah, for sure.
Not straight up, for sure, yeah. But I see that you do insinuate that quite a bit in the interviews that you give and the talks that you give. So,
Yeah.
what is your definition of storytelling?
So we started Small Talk for rather selfish reasons. We're just two friends who are constantly curious about this beautiful, crazy thing called life and how people navigate through it as we do ours.
We wanted to ask questions and learn everything from how people find true love online to dealing with cancer, and thought, why not share our learnings with everyone who's interested to learn and grow along the way? So this is us, creating conversations beyond small talk.
So I think my knack for storytelling first and foremost was I think a developed skill. I don't think it was just absolutely natural to begin with. I think it was all very experimental. But I guess my pure definition of storytelling is to really how to connect and emote. So I think to develop a curiosity and interest, first and foremost there must be some form of connection. And I think a good story does that. A good story comes through music, comes through movies, comes through painting and art, and it's how I see the world. And generally, basically, when I want to connect with someone, I like to find out a little bit more about who that person is, not just by name or what you do for work, but the whole background that encapsulates. So I think in general, you may ask where did all this curiosity and motivation come from. I used to be in theatre work, so I developed an interest for the arts.
So you used to act?
I used to act, but the interest came from my time in university. I attended a play and I was like, wow. I mean, within an hour and a half, I was so glued on to the story and the premise, and so it formed my imagination of how to connect.
Wow.
I mean, I always wanted to sing, but I can't. So I guess this was the alternative. Yeah.
Sing then you act.
Yeah.
Still storytelling.
But what, I'm just curious, like how did it even come into your mind, right? This whole concept of storytelling. Like, it's not an everyday topic that you would think. I mean, we do it, right? But we don't think about it or like bring it to our consciousness.
That's true.
I think my heightened senses came from the arts, because as a theatre practitioner, it's not so much about sometimes just delivering your lines.
That's true, right?
But it's also the art of listening. And sometimes that's even more powerful than just delivering your line. So I realized when I do look at spaces for my work at EPW, I like to see at empty spaces and see how that even when there's silence, there is still a voice.
Wow.
So that's quite interesting.
I mean, like you see a space, we just see space, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Did you see like APW as just like a backbone of an empty book, and all these things that you have there's like characters that you add on it?
Yeah. So I think if you ask me to explain to you systematically, the approach would be to define the premise. So premise is a space. What is the
big
premise?
picture.
Yeah.
Right.
What is the premise?
Yep.
And then we establish the premise of the background story. Why did this premise exist? Why was this premise possible? So it was successful, it's dilapidated. So you build the layers.
Right. Okay.
So then when you start creating a narrative, it carries weight.
Not just fluff, like
Correct.
Like,
so when you define it as a printing factory, a printing company, what is the layers behind the printing company?
Nice.
Its history, its legacy,
Right.
and why is it a state as it is now sunsetting? So that's how I look at things. And any good story will always have conflict. And any good story will always have a resolution.
Cool.
So defining that conflict and the resolution gives that kind of like that ebb and flow.
So for APW, what is the conflict and what is the resolution?
So I think for the conflict in APW was simply the fact that the company was in the bad debt of say 8 million ringgit when I came back. I guess the family weren't very focused. A lot of the business was stagnant. Operations were not well maintained. So these are building blocks to a good story. So I guess if I had looked at it commercially, say this is the analysis. So I was wearing a different lens.
No-brainer, right?
Correct.
Right.
And then we had about 110 staff working with us, blue collar, white collar.
Yeah.
So it's so easy to cut and just say,
So when you took over, it was still operating as usual?
it was still operating.
Oh, wow, okay.
So I had to switch the story.
Yeah.
So the resolution was to create a different narrative altogether, and that's my journey. And when I look at spaces, it's just generally in terms of lighting, posturing, position.
Posturing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So for instance, if you are acting on stage, right?
Okay.
If you're going to deliver a line that carries confidence, before you deliver the line, your posture is very
It's like body
important.
language.
Yeah. So looking at the space of the physical building as well, what is the posture? It's all close
wow,
together. So
this is
just
so
changing the layer.
fascinating.
So I'm just thinking, like, apart from your work with spaces and stuff, how do you kind of use storytelling in your everyday life and your decisions?
I think a lot in my journey sometimes is quite lonely, and you're normally your own cheerleader. So sometimes part of what I do is I journal or I write, and I
Nice.
document the process, and sometimes you need to create new narratives, and I just explore possibilities, and sometimes there's no fear on paper, right? So
Yeah.
you know sometimes you build up your spend and you just put it all there on paper, and it helps me. It helps me, and so sometimes I also reflect back my childhood sometimes, and I think like, why did I learn the guitar or the piano and it didn't do too well for me, you know? And now that I'm in a position to do it again, how
Right.
would I approach it? And then I revisit my parents' narrative of trying to push me through these regimented sort of schooling.
Right.
So the learning process was not built out of
Insightful.
interest,
Right.
built out of
Yeah.
ruling. So I wanted to change the narrative. So I've recently been revisiting, trying to learn how to play the piano, play the guitar, and documenting. So the process is interesting. So there's this whole motion of self-discovery, and I think I want to really move through life with that constant curiosity. I don't want to grow up and then just
Stagnant.
stagnate and
Right.
be flat.
Which a lot of the baby boomers do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Retirement was their goal, and then they just stagnant.
Right.
That's true. And I think that's the key word that's really mentioned, right? The process, being curious not just about the destination,
Yeah.
but it's about being curious about the process of getting there. So may tell us, if one person wants to get really good at storytelling, what can they do? Any tips that you can share?
I think first and foremost you must be generally quite curious, and I think curiosity leads to a sense of discovery, and to get there I think it's very important to explore widely. So I read, I watch, I use photography, I use art, I mix it all around. So sometimes I don't write, but I draw or I map out things. So I think find different points that can connect the dots, and that helps me a lot. So for instance, if you wanted to get very good at storytelling, if you're interested in playing the saxophone,
Yeah.
so you learn about the instrument, then you learn about your teacher, then you learn about its background,
Okay.
and then why did your passion for saxophone came out, or because I used to hear this sound when I was walking back from school through a music center, and I pick up, and that became, and that really kind of cements the interest for me generally, and I enjoy that process. So I think really about process, preparation, and to be honest, to make a good story, in my view, is that when you are exploring and discovering, it's very chaotic. It's kind of all over the place.
okay,
Your post-it notes, your canvas is all filled.
Yeah.
But when it's time to convert this piece into a great piece of story, it needs to be simplistic. It needs to have, it needs to be clarifying. So it needs to be crystal. It needs to be distilled. So I'm very, very clear when I work with people. When I'm in my mode of crafting, it's all very chaotic.
Right.
But when it's down to me communicating to the other party, I need to be very respectful. I need to done the work so that this person can pick up point 1, point 2, point 3 very, very clearly.
So Soon Wei, do you see life as a big story that you can kind of work on? Like how's your approach to life? I'm just curious about that.
Yes, I do, but I think to be fair, when I was a lot younger, when you're working for people, you also tend to get stuck sometimes in life, where you're working with an organization and you feel that you can do more, but you have to commit to your role. And I think I started asking questions, or you started journaling, or maybe blogging, you started crafting that, and I realized that I was just identifying all the issues at hand, but I wasn't actually coming out with outcomes that I wanted to do. You know? So I started then writing narrative. What would my ideal life be? What would be our ideal workplace? And, you know, so I was just cementing, and then I started. Okay, I seem to be enjoying writing stories. It's a very safe space for me to explore and do these things. Then I started asking questions of, okay, how do you build a good story, right? Like, you know, then the whole premise, resolution, outcomes. But I think in a nutshell, it's about creating the right arc. You know, so something that converges and really shapes a good story. And it started allowing me to respond to the world in the sense that I find the world also very noisy. There's so much noise, options, and distractions, and if you're not careful, you know, it's just a cloud of content, that's just information that's flowing, but you don't contextualize it. And I think stories allow you to contextualize it. It helps you frame, you know. And I started working on that more everyday systematic approach. And that was when my desire of trying to do my own thing so that I have more time to do the things that I like to do and serve in the areas that I like to serve. I wanted to write my own, I wanted to craft my own. And I started drafting, and ironically, I can say it now because stuff that I used 4 or 5 years ago in pages came out as visions, came out as realities. So I drew.
That is amazing.
You know, if I had a journal now, I could actually open up. I had said my ideal workplace was to have a space with a lot of trees, open colors.
So it's very specific even.
Yeah, so I guess
down
it's
to
like
the details.
the epw was the outcome, but the heart and the vision was already kind of like brewing in that sense. And sometimes you want to kind of imagine people that you like to meet, you know. So, you know,
So do you even write that like future people that you want to meet?
I mean, generally I do make an attempt, like, you know, I like to
Very
meet someone in the areas that could guide me in this form, you know, or help me kind of navigate through that. And because I didn't have the resources to buy into, say, workshops or networking groups. I had to craft it out. So
and you did it, through your
so,
storytelling.
That's
pretty amazing.
And I think we all do storytell. I mean, we all have our personal narratives, and a lot of it is either that they will shape it to be really good lifting beliefs or limiting beliefs, right? It's all about the beliefs that in order how we act and behave and show up in the world. Right? It all boils down to our narratives. And I think what you're doing is that you are creating your own narrative and just being so aware of the words, the narrative, the stories that you tell
very
yourself.
descriptive of like the little details. Right?
I do find sometimes when I don't do it as often, I slack or I lack of it.
I can imagine.
I feel that my center is also shifting. I
Because
start.
it's so chaotic, right? Like you said.
So it is your way of life. It is your way.
And sometimes when I go back to writing, it's not even about drafting story. It's just about unloading stuff that is kind of like tanked in. And there's got this diarrhea of things going on and off, and then, you know, letting it rest.
Thank you for joining us at Small Talk today. We hope you gained some new insights in today's episode. Feel free to share this with your loved ones and your friends.
We're also always looking for new topics for Small Talk. Feel free to share your ideas at smalltalkasia@gmail.com. Join us in the next one.